Hey guys, Daily Tech here, and today I've got something pretty exciting for you. I just recently had an opportunity to try out the HTC Vive and it was a blast. So I decided to compare the Vive against my Gear VR setup using Riftcat and PlayStation Move controllers. Now before anybody says that I'm nuts and there's absolutely no comparison whatsoever, I'd like to remind you that there's a lot of different features you need to consider when putting together your own VR system. Now I've broken this down into 12 different categories that I think you should consider, so let's take a look at those. So first we're going to be looking at the overall cost of everything. Then we'll move to how much everything weighs. Next is the ease of setup. And then we'll move to the picture quality, then the latency and motion of the display. Next will be controller layout and tracking, then overall immersion, and how user-friendly the system is overall. Then there'll be the connectivity, and then we're going to find out if one gives you a better gaming advantage over the other. Lastly, we'll move on to replacement parts and versatility. So when it comes to cost, this part's pretty easy. Everything just has a dollar value. Now with the Gear VR setup, I didn't bother including the phone only because that's something that everybody already has anyways. Now keep in mind all the prices here are going to be in Canadian dollars, but the HTC Vive is going to run you about $1,200 to $1,300 after tax and shipping. Whereas with my Riftcat and PS Move setup, the hardware and the Riftcat software is going to run you anywhere in the neighborhood of $160 at the really low end, up to $260 on the high end if you don't really shop around all that much. Now with the cost being the first thing that most people look at, the Gear VR and Riftcat setup definitely earn their point here. Now looking at my Gear VR with the phone installed and the controller for head tracking attached as well, we have a total of 582 grams. Now we'll move to the Vive headset, and here I've included about 5 feet worth of cable because this is what you're going to be carrying anyways, and that weighed in for a total of 745 grams. Also, I decided to take a look at the controllers as well while I was at it, and it turns out the PlayStation Move controller is 146 grams, and the Vive controller is 200 grams. So no matter how you look at it, the Vive gear is going to be about 25% heavier in both headset and controller. So if you do plan on playing for any kind of extended period of time, having less weight on you is much better, so this point has to go to the Gear VR again. Now let's take a look at how easy these are to set up. Now setting up the Vive was an absolute piece of cake. All you do is take your two lighthouses, pop them on a bookshelf on either corner of the room, then plug all the cables into your computer, and then just run Steam VR and then do the room setup. And that's just about it. Now we moved my friend's setup from his office to his living room, and that took about 20 minutes to get everything done, which completely blew me away. Now setting up the Gear VR to work with Riftcat and the PS Move service is a little bit more of a task. First, you need to make sure that your phone connects properly to Riftcat and streams the way you want. Secondly, there's a ton of calibration for the controllers and for the cameras to make sure all the tracking works just fine for both the hand controllers and the head tracking. Then after that, there's most likely going to have to be some troubleshooting done to iron out some bugs. Once that's done, you still have to do the room setup in Steam VR. Now to give you an idea, I've set this up a few times now, and it's pretty safe to say I can get this done in about 2 hours from start to finish. Now this is after a learning lot through trial and error and experience. But for a person wanting to set it up on their first time ever, chances are you might have to spend about a weekend working on it. Needless to say, once it's set up once, you really don't want to move it again. But for ease of setup, this was an easy point for the HTC Vive. Now the Vive uses a type of lens that when you look directly at them, you can clearly see rings all throughout. Also, the screen looked a little blurry, almost like I wanted to clean off the lenses a bit. Now the Vive has a field of view of 110 degrees, and it uses a display that is 2160 by 1200. This means you get a pixel density of 456 pixels per inch. Now the Gear VR has a much more simple type of lens. It's very clear and very smooth. Looking through it, you get no artifacts whatsoever, and the picture is relatively clear. Now the new 2016 version of the Gear VR, which is the one I use currently, has a field of view of 104 degrees. This 6-degree difference in field of view is really hard to notice, and even if you're looking for it, you might have trouble spotting it. Now I use the Galaxy 6 Edge Plus as a phone, which is the display in my VR setup. Now that has a 2560 by 1440 resolution on a 5.7 inch screen, which gives you a pixel density of 518 pixels per inch. So in conclusion, the Gear VR had a little bit less screen door effect, and the picture was a little bit more clear, and the colors seemed to pop a little bit better on the Gear VR as well. Also, what I've read as well is that you can use a semi-matte screen protector on your phone, and this will help to eliminate even more screen door effect, and as long as it's not too matte, it doesn't affect the picture quality. Now because of these reasons, the point does have to go to the Gear VR. Moving your head around in the Vive is really smooth and just feels great. Now this is pretty much exactly what I expected because you have a display that's directly attached to your video card by HDMI, and mixed with Valve's reprojection technology, it just feels constantly smooth no matter which way you look. Another nice thing of the 90Hz display is that you get no ghosting and no motion blur. Now things are a little bit different with the Gear VR and the Riftcat setup. This uses your network to stream the video, so there's really no chance of it being as good as an HDMI connected display. However, many advancements have been made so far, and this latency has been brought down to an absolute minimum. Now using the Gear VR and Riftcat, I have yet to get any kind of motion sickness at all, and once you get used to it, you really don't even notice it anymore, to be honest. Now with the Gear VR specifically, when you put your phone in there, it puts it into a low persistence display mode. What this does is to help with the fact that it's only a 60Hz display, to help reduce any kind of ghosting, and to reduce any kind of motion blur as well. Lastly, the Gear VR does have built-in sensors, so head tracking and positioning is pretty accurate too. Now if you're comparing this to a Google Cardboard, the Gear VR and Cardboard are really no comparison. So due to the small bit of latency you're going to get with Riftcat running at its best, and the inevitable network interruptions that might give you some pixelation, this point has to go to the Vive. So now let's take a look at the controller layout and tracking. Now the Vive controllers have somewhat of an unfair advantage here when it comes to layout because all of the games are designed for that controller specifically. This means that all the instructions in game match up just fine, and all the buttons that you need to use are in the most natural place. Now this is the part that got me the most, is the tracking of the controllers. Now I could not believe how spot on the tracking was. It didn't matter where I was in the room, the controllers were always moving just perfectly, and the precision was just down to the millimeter. Now the PlayStation Move controllers on the other hand work pretty well, but they do have their limitations. Once they're calibrated and set up properly, you'll get reasonably good tracking in the middle of your room. The problem is when you start getting to the edges of the room, that's when your cameras start losing focus on them, and the controllers start shaking a little bit out there. Also, with the PlayStation Move controllers, getting things off the floor is generally pretty tricky too. Now in most games, reaching right to the floor is something you don't have to do, but if you do, I do have other ways to counteract that as well. So really, I don't find it too often that I get frustrated with the controller jittering around. Lastly, even though the developers of the PS Move service have done a fantastic job getting that PS Move to mimic an HTC Vive controller, there's still from time to time button combinations that you might have to program in for different games. So with some of the buttons being in strange places and the game's not really telling you which one's which, and having to learn how to use the emulated touchpad, it takes some getting used to. So even just for the tracking alone, I'm going to give the point to the HTC Vive. Now with the overall immersion, I've been using my Gear VR for quite some time now and got pretty used to it. Then when I did have the opportunity to try the Vive out, I thought it was going to be a huge eye-opener and just blow me out of the water with how different it is. Turns out it really wasn't the case. The additional tracking did make things a little bit nicer, but I don't know if it actually made it feel more immersive. The two of them also have about the same field of view, so really that didn't swing me either. So on a visual standpoint, it was a complete wash in my opinion, but it was the controller tracking that really drew me in. And because of that controller tracking, it gives you a little bit better of a sense of actually being there. And for that reason, again, I'm going to give the point to the Vive. So if we look to see how user-friendly these two different systems are, you may have guessed by now that the Gear VR setup is going to be a little bit more quirky and takes more getting used to. Now it does use multiple pieces of software to get the same job done, but I have made automated scripts to make all of that run with just a double click anyways. Now if I were just to hand over my Gear VR setup to somebody, they might run into the odd issue that I'm completely used to. Things like recentering the controllers when you start up Steam VR. That needs to be calibrated each time you start. Also, on the Gear VR, if you touch the touchpad on the side of your headset, it recenters Riftcat on you. That's something as well that could throw you right off if you have no idea what's going on. Then trying to get straightened out from there, without knowing exactly how to do it, you're going to run into troubles and have to restart Steam VR, or you hope that someone's in the room that can fix it for you. Otherwise, your gaming session's over for the moment. Now like everything else, I've gotten used to dealing with these little quirks, and I can get everything straightened right back out within 2 to 3 seconds in the middle of a gaming session. So it really doesn't interrupt me all that much. But if you compare this to the HTC Vive, I've seen people for the first time ever touching VR put it on their head and they're gaming without issue. So for comparing direct learning curves, it looks like the Vive's going to take a bit of a commanding lead at this point. So now we run into the first blowout for the Gear VR, the connectivity. The Gear VR, 100% wireless. That's right, no tether coming off your head, off your controllers, off anything. You just make sure your phone's connected to the same network your PC is, and you're good to go. The Vive, on the other hand, has a big tether coming off the back of your head. Now the cable that I was using was plenty long enough, but I did find myself time to time while gaming stepping on it and jerking my head backwards while I was trying to move forward or something. It happened a few times, it was pretty jarring, and I thought for sure I was going to break something. Also, with the Vive, it is going to require an HDMI port on your video card, so if your card only has one of those ports and you're using it for a monitor, you're going to need some sort of a DisplayPort adapter to attach to another monitor as well. So even just the ports on your computer might cause some issues with your Vive too. Now before people start freaking out, I have heard of the wireless adapter for the HTC Vive. Now that doesn't come without a whole load of problems. The battery life is only 90 minutes, and one of the biggest complaints I've heard so far is that battery that sits on top of your head gets piping hot. No thanks, I get sweaty enough playing the Vive alone. So putting the latency and getting things connected aside, so the Gear VR setup just completely demolishes the Vive in this aspect. So now we'll be moving into the gameplay section of the video. Now I'm sure this isn't going to absolutely define which gives you the best advantage, but at least we'll find out if I can keep up with my Gear VR setup. I'll be playing 3 rounds of 3 different games on each system. Now for the sake of time, I'll just be showing you roughly the last 10 seconds of each round, but if you want to see the full uncut gameplay, I'll have a link to that in the top right of your screen shortly. The games we'll be playing are Space Pirate Trainer, Bleach Eel, and Zombie Training Simulator. So let's get right into Space Pirate Trainer now. This just doesn't feel right! Oh my god, what do I do?
You die.
10,000, that's my best yet. Fast anymore for these ways. Take my time a little bit more. Oh! So about the same.
You just have a set amount of health?
You get 3 hits. So see there, the 3 little.
Okay.
Those are your 3 hits. So my first round using the Vive and Space Pirate Trainer, I ended up with an 8,267 average. Not bad. And on the Gear VR with Riftcat, ended up with a 5,333 average. Not quite as good as the Vive, but still holding my own alright. So it looks like the Space Pirate Trainer point goes to the Vive. Next up, Bleach Eel. This game I'm a little bit more familiar with now, so hopefully I'll be able to put up a pretty good fight with the Gear VR. So, first try I've hit over 100 grand. God. Well, whatever. I'll take it.
115.
I thought you had that one.
So did I, but I'm done. Oh, there we go. Wow! Holy shit!
Doubled it, man.
Now, Blade Shield on the Vive goes pretty decently. End up getting myself 137,666 average. Now with my Gear VR, I end up going all beast mode and stomping the guts out of my score with the Vive with a 213,333 average. So that punishing blow to the Vive scores the Gear VR another point. Now let's move on to a game that I'm completely unfamiliar with and see what happens. Zombie Training Simulator will be an interesting matchup since these represent my first 6 attempts at the game ever. So this is for real. This is my real way to attempt. What? Whoa! Whoa! I threw.
I don't know where that's taking.
Yeah! I got a gas can! I died! Come on! Oh my god! Go get it! Oh god! Okay, so is that my round 3?
I think
That's my round 3. So it looks like my sad attempts with the Vive earned me a score of 2,166 average.
Well done.
And then just when I thought I couldn't get any worse, I end up scoring 1,063 average with the Gear VR. So it turns out that controller accuracy is crucial in this, and throwing stakes out didn't go as well as I hoped. Some of my throws ended up going right in front of me, and others ended up going to the moon. Sadly, this is a massive defeat for the Gear VR, and the Vive earns the point. Now due to the nature of VR and swinging the controllers around and throwing things in game, there is the chance that things are going to break. Also, lighthouses can fall off of bookcases, fall off of shelves, or controllers can end up down the hallway when you're trying to throw a grenade or something. Things might break and you need to replace it. Now the Vive comes as a complete package when you buy it, which is really convenient. But I have tried to look around for replacement Vive controllers and replacement lighthouses, and let me tell you, I've never found a used one online, and I didn't dig too deep to find out what Valve charges for them if you need it. Because I'm pretty sure you're looking at a couple $100 at minimum. So if you break any part of the Vive setup, I've got no advice where to go with that. Now the PlayStation Move setup on the other hand, each individual part you can find just about anywhere. Cameras online are about $5, in fact I keep one spare on my shelf just in case something happens with one of mine. Controllers, even though the PSVR is now using the same controllers and have brought the price up a little bit, you can still find a controller for about $30. So really, that's not a whole load of an issue there either. Also, the headset itself is relatively inexpensive as well, but I guess the only part that really sucks to replace is your phone. So since everything in the PS Move and the Gear VR setup is completely modular, this one's definitely going to get the point as well. So moving on to the last category of this shootout is versatility. The HTC Vive is designed to do one thing on one system using one piece of software, and it does it really well. So as soon as you take the PC out of the equation or try to add different hardware to it, I think you're going to start running into big problems. The Gear VR setup, on the other hand, can do a whole load of things. You've got the choice between Steam VR, anything on the Oculus Store on both the PC side, and also right on the phone side. You can lay in bed and watch movies with it. You can easily transport over to a friend's house or just take it anywhere else that you go. And heck, if you get really bored and desperate, you can play some of the Google Cardboard games, which are terrible. Long story short, this setup can do everything the Vive can do and a whole lot more. So clearly the points gotta go to the Gear VR setup. So in conclusion to this whole shootout, even though we didn't come to a clear-cut winner, there is one factor that's really important that we did not measure, and that's what's most valuable to you. If you're on a really tight budget but you still want to really give VR a shot, then the Gear VR setup is clearly for you. Also, if you don't want to have to buy multiple pieces of hardware and you just want one thing that's going to do everything pretty decently, then again, the Gear VR solution might be for you as well. But if you're looking for the very best motion, the very best tracking, and the easiest thing to use ever, and have it work as best as possible, then clearly you need to get yourself the Vive. But just remember, you need to overlook things like the tether and the lack of versatility. But if you're one of those people that just want the best of every world, Well, looks like you'll be waiting till at least the year 2020. But remember, VR is still in its first gen, and absolutely nobody has perfected it yet. So I hope this video helped you decide on how you want to experience VR. There are many things to consider, and when you're spending this amount of money, you want to make sure you get the right thing. Now don't forget to subscribe and check out my channel for more content using and setting up this Gear VR. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.